Music has a way of stirring our emotions, sometimes for good, sometimes not so good, and then there are times when it is very good. This past Friday night, I went to a high school football game, and two different bands had their performances during halftime. The performances were very good. But what if a large university were to send their great, skilled band members, say 300 of them, to go to a field? And during the entire presentation, they all stand perfectly still the entire time. And everybody plays the same instrument, the trumpet. And everybody plays the same note. And I'm not saying A so that they can tune their instrument. I'm saying they're playing the melody. So all 300 playing with perfection because of their skill, all playing the same note, which is the melody. Somehow it just wouldn't be great. Even though they're more skilled than the high school players, it wouldn't be good because there isn't variation, a variety of instruments, a combination of notes and chords going on at the same time. It's amazing how the greatest unity takes place in the midst of greatest diversity when they are all headed in the same direction, when they are all working together. Unity among the band is great because it focuses on the end result of the song. But when everyone's doing the same thing, it's not necessarily unity, it's uniformity. They are all the same. And when God calls us to unity, He's not saying we should all be carbon copies of each other. We should all be uniquely different, yet working together to form a unity. You know, unity in music is a wonderful thing, but something even greater is unity within a church. And that is our focus for today. And as we look at Psalm 133 in our continuing series of the Ascent Psalms, we see how the focus is now moving towards unity. It's amazing how these 15 Ascent Psalms do have a sense of progression. Remember the very first one, it says, "O Lord, protect us from all the difficulties as we travel towards Jerusalem." But then they moved closer and they went to the place of worship. Then they went into the worship. Then they met the very presence of God. And as it continued up until last week, that they came to the point of actually seeing God face to face. And now it moves to the point of unity. And we can't get the full picture of Psalm 133 without remembering Psalm 132. It's because we are all focused on the face of God that it brings unity. It's when we take our faces off of Him that we become separate and we become just a group of scattered people doing our own thing. But focusing on the Lord brings the unity in many ways. But as I think of when this was probably written, did you notice in the title, it says a song of ascents, but it also says of David. David is credited with writing this. So people make guesses as when he may have written it. And they say it must have been after he was crowned the king of Israel and all of the nation was unified. And that's very possible. But I personally feel that the emotions in this passage probably reflect a time after when things weren't so wonderful. And he's now thinking back on those days when there was unity, and you cause so many more emotions to rise up. You know, sometimes senior adults will say things like, you know, things were so much better when I was younger. Well, you didn't say it back then, but why do you notice it being so wonderful? Because things aren't so good right now. So that's just an opinion on my part, that I believe he wrote this later in his kingdom time. And as we've already mentioned, the focus is really God, not anything else. It's amazing how you ask people, how can we become unified in our country? And boy, is that ever a miracle to take place. For us to be unified, to have a unified focus. Hippies and many others will say, we just need to love each other. There are many songs out there which say things like, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. I typed in the phrase, love is the answer, and the internet pulled up 12 different popular songs with that same title. Everyone is saying love, and what they usually mean is, you guys need to quit fighting, and you guys need to be tolerant of my beliefs. If you'd only embrace what I believe, we could all love each other. But the center of the universe is not us as individuals, it's God. So let's go further into this, and let's look at the first verse to see some of the greatness of unity. When we read verse 1, it says, behold how good and how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. It's interesting how it begins with the word behold. If I were to tell you it's going to be over 90 degrees in certain parts of the United States today, you wouldn't be fazed. If I tell you in 6 months from now that it's going to snow here in the Cleveland area, you wouldn't be fazed. But if something incredible takes place, let's say snow falls today in Cleveland, I would probably begin with the phrase, behold, as if to say, what I'm about to say is rare. And that's true for this passage. When David speaks of unity, he's saying, behold, I want to talk about something that's so rare and amazing. Let's go to the next aspect, that the greatness is represented by superlatives. You notice he says how good and how pleasant it is. He didn't say that it's good. He didn't say it was pleasant. He didn't even say it's good and pleasant. But he's saying how good and how pleasant it is. Some of you parents have probably had kids to squabble and fight each other. And for you to actually see them playing together, and they're not fighting at all, there's a sense of wholesomeness and pleasantness that fills you up. It is so wonderful to see the kids not fighting, but they're actually enjoying each other. Business owners have the same idea and feeling when they see everyone in the business happy and they're working together. David is the king, and he's seeing his people having a sense of unity and joy, and that's bringing such excitement to him. But like I said, he's probably writing it later in life, and he's looking back at those good old days when we actually liked each other and weren't killing each other. Now let's go to the next part of the aspect. The greatness is represented in dwelling together. He says, for brothers to dwell together in unity. Isn't it amazing how groups claim they really like each other? They see each other at least 10 minutes a week, maybe some for a full hour. But things change when they go on a trip together. For churches, it might be a mission trip. Now all of a sudden you find out some of the differences of other people. One person wants the window up, the other one wants the window down. Then it's a painting project, and some people say we should use a painting tape, and others say you shouldn't use painting tape. Some say start at the top and go down, others say and all of a sudden the tensions are building, and the mission trips can sometimes be rather tense. The passage is saying how great it is when they dwell together in unity. Not that they just meet each other every once in a while, but they actually have to spend time with each other, dwelling together. When I went to college, we were told that I'm sorry, guys. I know you guys would like to have the best of roommates. We'll do the best we can if you put in a request. But we're telling you the truth. The number one complaint we have when people are paired up with someone else is that one person wants the window up, the other one wants the window down. How well do Christians do when they get with each other? Can leaders honestly say, what a joy to see them dwelling together in unity? By the way, did you know that one large mission organization about 60 years ago was noticing how come 50% of our missionaries come back from the mission field and they don't want anything else to do with being a missionary? Interesting, that follows up with our Bible study this morning. The guy did this massive research and interviewed the people. Why did you leave? What was the cause? And his conclusion was the number one reason they left the mission field was not because of the natives or the poisoned arrows. It was because they couldn't get along with other people. David is saying, oh, how pleasant and how good it is when brothers are dwelling together in unity. And let's look at one more aspect, the word brothers. Here, the greatness is a common focus, for he says the word brothers. You know, enemies can never have unity. They're at odds with each other. And if they ever come to some sense of unity, it's only because they have a common cause. I mean, you see this in the book of Acts repeatedly. When people are fighting each other, but then comes along a Christian, and enemies all of a sudden become best of friends because their common cause is to hate and want to kill a Christian. So when he says brothers, he's saying when we have something in common and we have a common focus, we have unity. Well, here are just a few aspects of the greatness of unity, but I want us to move on to the second verse, and it is at this point you absolutely must turn off your Western mindset and turn on the mindset of someone from the Middle East. They are not like we are, literal, analytical. What does the passage say, and take it exactly. They're more interested in what's the idea behind it. How does it relate to me? So the person who needs to turn off the brain the most is Randy Langham, because I take things so literally. So now we come to this next part, and we see that it says unity compares to anointing oil. You say, what does that have to do with anything? Let's look at the first part. It produces a fragrance. The verse begins with, it is like the precious oil upon the head. Whose head? Aaron's head. So they're thinking of their high priest, not just the priest, but the high priest. Let me read you a passage from Exodus 30, which tells you exactly what the oil is that's mentioned here in verse 2. It says, moreover, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take also for yourself the finest of spices, of flowing myrrh, 500 shekels, and of great fragrant cinnamon, half as much, 250, and of fragrant cane, 250, and of cassia, 500, according to the shekel of the sanctuary, and of olive oil a hin. You shall make of these a holy anointing oil, a perfume mixture, the work of a perfumer. It shall be a holy anointing oil. So what's being poured onto Aaron's head in this passage is the oil, the anointing, specifically designed for a high priest. It is very fragrant. Now we need to pause automatically and go back to what's the big picture. The big picture of the entire psalm is unity. And when unity does take place, it's amazing. You can almost smell how much nicer life is. When your kids are not squabbling and fighting. When the organization you're with is not having meetings which last hours and hours and hours afterwards because of fighting, but instead they like each other It's almost as if you can smell it, like the fragrance of the high priest's oil. We also see that it represents great value, for it says in the passage, it is like the precious oil upon the head. It's very precious. It's very valuable. And again, it's only if you've ever experienced such moments of unity that it's wonderful. It's so great. I mean, the opposite is when people are fighting each other. I saw something for the very first time 2 nights ago at a football game. Everyone's focused on the play over here, but we've all heard yelling off to the side, and we look over there, and one athlete standing on the sideline is yelling and wants everyone within a mile to hear it. He's yelling loud. He pulls his jersey off, throws it down, and he runs away. That's not the spirit of unity. It causes all kinds of ugliness to kind of come up inside of you. But when everyone's working together, whether you win or lose, the unity is fragrant. It is also very valuable. Let's go to another one. It represents a blessing. For he says, coming down upon the beard, even Aaron's beard. Now, if you have a mind like Randy Langham, you really need to shut off your brain on this one. I have been bothered with this passage for weeks, actually all my life, because I have a negative understanding of this. While I've been dreading this moment, I've also been excited that I'd finally studied and find out what it really means. The only thing I ever see in a man's beard is the leftovers of his breakfast. When I look at them, it's like, oh, I know what you had for breakfast. You had eggs and bacon. And they don't realize they still have pieces down there. Now, that's what I'm thinking of when I read this. Turn your brain off, Randy. What's the picture? You're pouring anointing oil over him, and it's going down to his beard. The point is not that someone's messy. It's not that they poured too much over the front side of his face instead of... So we have to turn off the Western mindset of literalism, and what's the big idea? And the idea is the blessing starts at the top and it just comes down. And it's starting to cover all of you, which is where it leads in the last part. It impacts the whole life. It comes down upon the edge of the robes. Now, there are only 2 edges of a robe, the top or the bottom. The top being the collar or the bottom being the hem. And for many people in America, the automatic is, oh no, it can't be the hem, because we're thinking too American and Western, we're thinking he's being drenched. It must have been just a little trickle down to the collar, but that's not the point. Remember, the big picture is the joy of unity. And the blessing of all of that truly is as if it starts at the head and just completely covers you. The idea is all over your body. Again, my mindset is to take a 55-gallon drum of priestly anointing oil and dousing the entire priest until he's totally soaked. That's not what the passage is saying. It's saying the blessings just completely cover you when you're among people who are not fighting and squabbling. They like each other. They have unity. There's such a fragrant joy, a blessing that covers all of you. Truly, all of you who have experienced that can say, yes, that's true. It continues into the next verse. With verse 3, we see unity compares to the dew of Hermon. Here's another one. We need to turn off the American literalist mindset. It is like the dew of Hermon coming down upon the mountains of Zion. Hermon is many, many miles northeast of Jerusalem. In fact, Jerusalem is able to see Hermon because the mountain is 9,200 feet above sea level. At least the top of it is. And if snow starts somewhere around the 7,000 foot level, then the mountain is usually covered with snow. It is a very prominent area. In fact, the rain and the snow from Mount Hermon pours down the sides into the rivers. They flow into Sea of Galilee and into the Jordan River, down to Israel. There's this mindset, even though the top of Jerusalem, the highest peak is 2,200 feet above sea level, it's still descending. The mindset is the blessings come down, the dew, the moisture comes down from them and down to Israel. Unity has this amazing effect. And for those of you who are wondering if this is the founding of Mountain Dew, no, this is not where that began. But we come to the fourth major part of the message, and this is that the Lord commands unity forever. Look at it. The very end of the psalm says, "For there the Lord commanded the blessing, life forever." He commanded it, that we would have unity. Now, I'd like to take that last part of verse 3 and leapfrog 2,500 years. David lived approximately 500 years BC. It was 1,000, so I guess it's a 3,000-year leap. He lived 3,000 years ago, and I'd like for us to apply that today, because he said he wants unity forever. I also mentioned at the beginning of the message that the greatest unity comes from the greatest diversity, when all of them are working together for a common cause. Are you aware that God intentionally made some people light-colored skin and gave other people dark-colored skin? And selfish human beings constantly think, why would God do something so mean? Who's been cursed? Who's done something wrong? That's not anything to do with anything. God intentionally made us different so that when we would come together and love each other, the world would say, wow, what a mighty God he is. In a couple of weeks, as we start a series through Proverbs on relationships, we're going to look at a few passages that mention that God point blank makes some people rich and some people poor. Tell that to a politician. God makes some people rich and some people poor. Why? So that when they love each other, there's only one reason. God. It's not because any government has helped them out to make them all be equal somehow. God intentionally made us different. He made some to be male and some to be female, some to be tall, some to be short. We're different. And then our personalities are different. Some people want to do things now. Let's get the project done now. Some people aren't even interested in project. They just want to talk to other people. They're more relational. And when all of us being so different can work together, God gets the glory. I mean, that's what he says in John chapter 13. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. This was demonstrated very well about 60 years ago. Maybe some of you remember back in the 60s that the racial tension was terrible in America. And Martin Luther King said that the most segregated place in all of America was Birmingham, Alabama. During the 60s, there were over 70 bombings where people are trying to kill other people of a different skin color. In fact, the name Birmingham was given a nickname, Bombingham, because so many bombs were blowing up. And in 1973, God did something amazing. A miracle took place on a football team at Woodlawn High School. And the team, with a lot of racial tension, even on the team, all of a sudden, they became Christians and they began loving each other. Before practice, they would get together hand in hand or maybe arm in arm and pray together for God's work to be done. And the coach, according to a video representation of that, was not yet a Christian. And he's just shaking his head, what's going on? Because he goes home and the only thing on the news is the hatred and the violence all over Birmingham. the whites and the blacks are fighting each other, and then he goes to his own football team and they love each other. He can't figure that out. Something is going on. How can there be so much unity in the midst of so much racial tension? And the answer is they all had their hearts turned towards the Lord, and they finally became colorblind. They didn't see each other as black or white or anything else. Just other desperate sinners in need of the Lord, all struggling to be more like Christ. The impact was so great at Woodlawn High School that another school not too far away was Banks High School. They were the rival team every year. The hatred between those was terrible. And the people at Woodlawn discovered, you know what? Love is not love until you start giving it away to your enemies. And they realized, we need to share this with the people at Banks High School. And sure enough, almost the entire team became Christians. And now these two teams, which have been fighting each other for years in competition and with hatred and other vulgarities, they're now actually practicing together, and they enjoy each other, and they huddle together. Why? Because their unity is in Jesus Christ, and that is their common bond. I'd like to take that and move it to another application for today.